Well, there we go again with that ridiculous intro video. I don't know what I was thinking, but you're welcome. Good day, and you're watching episode 2 of Crosstalk 2020, coming to you live from the heart of the most disappointing apocalypse ever. No zombies, no roving gangs of ludicrously dressed bikers, and no giant nuclear monsters. Just regular people incapable of staying the fuck home, wearing masks, or going 3 days without stockpiling toilet paper. Disappointing. Anyway, I'd like to say I am so glad to see so many of the lovely people from the Catherine Hellman's Hair on Who's the Boss Reruns Appreciation Society Facebook group here today. It's nice to see you've stopped squabbling long enough to finally eat some cake and take a fucking bath. And we would especially like to welcome all the representatives of the Whiff Hefferton's Hefty Whiffs Nasal Parlor and Underwear Display Clinic who have chosen to join us here on the Crosstalk page at this time. Although furloughed and staying home, I still doubt very much if any of them have put on any clothes. We do sincerely hope that you all enjoy the show, and please remember, people, that no matter who you are and what you do to live, thrive, and survive, there are still some things that make us all the same. You, me, them, buttocks. We all have buttocks. Rare that a disease would force you to lose a buttock. Most people, even the most deprived people, have buttocks. I'd like to see the stats on those who don't, quite frankly. Anyway, our guest today is the tall, eloquent, self-confessed dork who writes for Film School Rejects, is host of the still awesome screening nights for the Alamo Drafthouse in Winchester, Virginia, is the co-host of the official podcast of the Alamo Drafthouse in Winchester, Virginia, the In the Mouth of Dorkness podcast, is co-host with his wife of the Comic Book Couples Counseling podcast, is a world authority on William Shatner and Star Trek V, and more importantly than any of that gumph, his wife Lisa writes exceptionally well for the aftermoviediner.com. He knows his ninjas, he's confident about cult film, he's communicative about comic books, and I bet he also boils a mean egg. It's the one, it's the only, it's Mr. Brad Gullickson.
I do boil a mean egg.
I thought you did, sir. You looked like a mean egg boiler if ever there was one.
Yeah. No. I'm looking to make scotched eggs. That's the next step.
That is the next step up of egg mastery, is being able to wrap it in sausage meat and then bread it with some weirdly orange breading. That really is the key to egg mastery, but I'm not even there yet. So
good.
So Andy Lunn has joined us from Britain. He says, I'm here, bollocks to Commode. So Mark Kermode, who most people know from the Wittertainment podcast, he apparently is hosting a live stream right now. And we're already one up on him because Andy Lunn has chosen this versus the pretentious quiff of Mr. Mark Kermode.
That's right.
I'm just throwing shade at other critics right now, Brad.
We've already mentioned Star Trek V, the best Star Trek film. So I think we're winning, as Charlie Sheen would say.
Definitely. We are definitely winning more than Mark Kermode, who definitely did not mention Star Trek V or William Shatner, because he probably snootily believes he's above it or some nonsense. So, Brad, you have an impressive list of credits. You have been, since we first met at the Philadelphia Comic-Con many years ago, you have been busy building quite the repertoire for yourself in online criticism, podcasting, and general film appreciation. So where did that begin for you in terms of, not so much where did film begin for you, but where did it begin for you in terms of building this resume and repertoire of everything you now do?
Well, I mean, I'm sure I've said this to you at some point. I'm trying to remember what year we met up at Philadelphia at that Wizard World.
It's either 2011 or 2012.
So if it's 2011, if it's 2011, that's the year that I started the blog In the Mouth of Dorkness with my buddy Matt Constantine. If it's 2012, it's a year after I started that blog. And so, we would just BS about whatever on that and just shout our opinions about film and comics and art into the void of Blogspot. And that got me used to sharing my opinions online. But really, when we met up in Philadelphia and you had a press badge to that comic convention and you got me over your shoulder to partake in a James Hong interview. I was like, well, if this joker,
if this lunatic
instead of James Hong, David Lopan himself, maybe I can find ways to get in front of David Lopan. And I haven't. I have not been able to get back to James Hong.
But you've been in front of some mighty impressive names, sir.
Yeah. And so what ended up happening is my buddy Darren came to Matt and I. He's like, well, we should start a podcast based on your blog, which was In the Mouth of Dorkness podcast, which you've mentioned. And then like 3 months into that, we interviewed the screenwriter of the film The Signal. And then it just sort of, like, you discover all you have to do is ask people to be on your podcast if you have a podcast. And some will say yes and some will say no. And, you just build from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's how I found it. It is essentially you either get some PR companies to start just generally mailing you stuff, and then occasionally you'll get a phoner, like a 10-minute phoner, and occasionally... Right. The phoner is for someone who's like, I got a phoner for oh my god, Tomahawk.
Yeah.
Bonehawk. We'll just call it Bonehawk. And Sid Haig was obviously in that and was the only actor from the cast who was willing to do phoners. So I got 10 minutes with Sid Haig. I liked Bone Tomahawk, but I had no interest in discussing the 30 seconds he's in Bone Tomahawk.
Right.
I wanted to ask him the Pam Grier question and what it was like hanging out with her in the Philippines, obviously. So sometimes, and like Joe Dante was another one when that girlfriend thing came out, the zombie girlfriend, which was not good at all, Joe. I don't know what was happening there. But I got 10 minutes with Joe Dante. So stuff like that happens. And then once you do that, maybe you pull the trigger and get an IMDb Pro account and try to hit up their individual agencies and PR stuff. But if you want to go Mike White it from the projection booth podcast, that was his big recommendation to me. He was like, IMDb Pro man, just send emails. So I don't know. Have you gone down that route yet, or is it just now that you're kind of a bit more of a known entity, you just getting sent stuff now?
I have not actually. I want to do IMDb Pro because I've been trying to get Kevin Eastman on the line. I was trying to get him for the 30th anniversary of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but all channels that I was working on just weren't working. And I was like, well, I haven't pulled the trigger on IMDb Pro yet because I'm a cheapskate. But really, like most people come to me now at this point, ever since I hooked up with One Perfect Shot and Film School Rejects. Once that happened 3 years ago, like the amount of access that I've had to filmmakers and performers and writers and things like that has just increased absurdly. And since the pandemic has started, I've been talking to people practically nonstop.
And now you're talking to me, which must be the highlight of the last 8 weeks of quarantine.
Yes. I like it.
So I imagine that the stuff you do with the Alamo Drafthouse in Winchester, that kind of just came from you're a voracious cinema goer. You consume, and you go to all those like 6 films in a row things and marathons and all that kind of stuff. So I imagine your connection with them came through just kind of you being there all the time and the natural kind of conversations that happen, or do you happen to know someone there and that's how you kind of ended up working for them or working with them rather?
Well, so like 5 years ago, I attended my first film festival at the Alamo Drafthouse in Winchester, Virginia, which is like an hour and 15-minute drive, an hour and 20-minute drive, depending on traffic. They have a festival there called the Lost Weekend, and it happens twice a year. And I attended Lost Weekend 3, and I think that year was like 16 films in the course of 3 days. And the one that they were just getting ready to launch, which was Lost Weekend 13, which was canceled or postponed. Let's call it postponed. That had 44 films in 3 days. So, they had a little success with those first few festivals, and then it exploded into this massive festival of advanced screenings and what have you, celebrity guests. So once I went to Alamo Drafthouse in Winchester, and I had gone to, the Ashburn Alamo Drafthouse. I'd gone to the ones in Texas, but Andy Geierson, the programmer there, I think is just one of the best curators of film that I've ever met. And we hit it off almost immediately at Lost Weekend 3, just chatting over the course of those 3 days. And from there, our relationship grew, and anytime he had a guest coming or any kind of email connection with a film, he'd throw them our way and ask if we'd want to interview so-and-so. The first person that we interviewed through that connection was Eduardo Sanchez, the co-director of the Blair Witch Project.
Nice.
And, we've had a brilliant relationship ever since then. And then 3 years ago, he invited us to be the official podcast of the Alamo Drafthouse in Winchester, Virginia. And it's been a blast ever since. I mean, I love Andy. I love the Naranjis family who run and operate that Alamo. They're beautiful people, and they're, most importantly, big-time movie maniacs. And they program their theater on the confidence of their knowledge and passion for these particular films. So while they, of course, bring in the usual suspects, Pixar movies and Marvel movies and what have you, they have Psycho Cinema every week. They have Film Club every week. And now they have Still Awesome every month with In the Mouth of Dorkness, which is like a celebration of films from 1990 to 2011-ish.
Well, I recently moved right near the one in Brooklyn. Right. It's right at the top of a shopping mall, but I recently moved near that one. So I'm also right near BAM, and BAM put on some great film marathons. So when this all blows over, that'll be my main focus. But I mean, I go to IFC Center, Anthology Film Archives, like all the ones in New York. And there's sort of a weird unofficial, like you see the same 10 folks at all these things, especially like the special stuff, special like screenings or speakings or Q&As or whatever. So yeah, I mean, I just imagined that, especially somewhere like Winchester, you're probably getting that even in a more kind of focused way, because there isn't the opportunity, the possibilities. Like I can go to 10 different screenings, or I can stay home. Whereas at the Winchester, there's like that concentrated thing, which is why I think it's so great that they put on all the alternative programming they do. They don't really need to do that in New York in quite the same way.
Right. And even in Washington, D.C., I'm in Reston, Virginia, so I'm outside of Washington, D.C. We have lots of really nice theaters and repertory theaters. We have the AFI Silver. We have Landmark E Street. We have the Angelica.
Count Gordeval does great screenings at the AFI Silver. I've got to come down for one of these one day. Yeah.
His 3D presentation of Creature from the Black Lagoon is one of my all-time favorite screenings.
Yeah, I saw that at the Film Forum in New York with the updated 3D with the proper glasses and everything, crisp print. Oh my God, so good.
But what I find is when you go to those screenings in the city, and I'm sure it's this way in New York, because there's so many options, the community around those screenings is still present, but not as dedicated is not the right word I'm looking for, but you have more options. So maybe you don't go to that screening of 2001, but you go to the Lawrence of Arabia screening. But in Winchester, Virginia, because they have the Alamo and one AMC playing the same old crap that you can see anywhere, the people who do attend Film Club, Psycho Cinema, and Still Awesome, I mean, it is a family unit. And since they trust you as a curator because you have not necessarily disappointed them all the time, and it does occur. Sometimes you pick a movie and they don't like it. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to see something interesting. So your return base, it's the same, like 90 people every week. And that's really, really beautiful. I mean, the Alamo Winchester feels like a family in a way that no other theater I've ever been to.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we're going to take a break in your story just there. I want to read some of the comments that we're getting while we're talking. So Gary Hill, back when we were talking about Mark Commode, he said, Quiff, never mind. Let's talk more about Uhuru's fan dance. I love it. She brings back, doesn't she do the fan dance in the original series and then brings it back for the 5th movie? Is that how that worked? Or?
Well, she has like a dance. She doesn't have the fan dance from Star Trek V in the original series, but she has similar moments.
Okay.
But not really, and definitely not nude, as she is fully nude in the Star Trek V sequence. Or I imagine she's fully nude because looks pretty nude. She could have some sort of situation on behind those fans. I don't know.
Well, that's fantastic. Gary Hill also asks about James Hong. Was he eating a banana? Every time I've seen him, he's eating a banana. These are important potassium-based questions. Gary Hill goes to a lot of conventions, both in Chicago and the Midwest, and so has seen James Hong many times. I don't remember him banana quaffing, but maybe he was. I don't know.
No, I don't remember him with a banana. But honestly, I don't remember him in any way other than it was James Hong, and I was like not deer in the headlights, but I felt like I had walked into a church and Jesus was there, or around him.
Well, I know that like we went to the James Hong talk when there was. Oh no, did I go and you were at the Captain's?
I went to the Captain's. Yeah,
you went to the Captain's, and I went to him. So he was very pissed off that he was scheduled alongside the Star Trek Captains because there was like 8 of us there. Yeah. But he did his Jimmy Cagney impression, which was glorious. But when I got to speak to him, all I remember is he had a black sequin trilby on, like he had a trilby with like black sequins on, and I was trying to ask him what I thought were kind of positive, interesting questions about Big Trouble in Little China. And he kept thinking I was trying to get dirt on like Kurt Russell. And I wasn't trying to get, like, I was saying nice things. And he was like, why would you want to know that? I'm not going to say anything out of school. And I was like, I'm not telling you to say anything out of school. Like, it was so confusing, but it was very noisy. It was very noisy.
I do remember that. And yeah, because you were doing the interview like on the show floor at his table while he was doing signings.
Yeah. It was so awkward and awful. Plus, while there was a student, film group that was like also filming him and like recording our interview. Plus, It was my first convention. It was my first time doing celebrity interviews like in person. So it was the pressure was insane. So Gary then says that Sid Haig is sadly missed. Biggest guy in the room every time when he's seen him. And Chicago needs an Alamo Drafthouse. We have terrific old movie houses for sure, but they need a Alamo Drafthouse. So pull some strings, Brad, and make it happen.
I guarantee you there'll be a Chicago Alamo at some point. They only just got to LA. But there's tons of them. The Winchester was actually the first Alamo outside of Texas, and now there's dozens of Alamos outside of Texas.
Yeah, well, they have to take over what the Landmark were doing, because the Landmark chain have just apparently given up on cult films or anything that people might actually want to see. And then Andy Lund says he has been to the Alamo Drafthouse in Minnesota, of all places. Amazing place, so well designed, and such great sightlines. Do you find that in the Winchester one?
Yes. I think they're only improving the sightlines, with every new design, because the Alamo's been around, the Winchester one's been around for a decade. It's a little more traditional in its seating. It still works, but what I tell anybody who's never been to an Alamo Drafthouse, the first time you go, you do have to get used to servers coming in and bringing food and just and not being distracted by that, because like the first year of going to the Alamo Drafthouse for me was challenging, because while I appreciated how much they love the theatrical experience and the no talking and all that, you still do hear squeaking of shoes on the floor as people are running by snatching up empty buffalo wing trays. It's beautiful.
We used to live near the Nighthawk in Brooklyn, Williamsburg. They've just opened one in Prospect Park now as well, so we'll be going more to that one. But they also do the food service during the movie, and we used to go see. They did a series called The Deuce, the 42nd Street screenings, and they would get a 35 mil print from back in the day. They present it with there's an introduction about like when it screened, where it screened, for how long it screened. They kind of set the scene, and then this like wacko New York cinema poet comes out and does like a little poem about the thing and about the movie theater and about where it played. Then they show you the print, which is almost always completely knackered to hell, but brilliant. And then they come out at the end and do a raffle, and that's my favorite cinematic night in New York. Like the few juices we've been to, they were really, really great. But it never bothered me really, the people running about and stuff. They managed to duck down, and you're normally seeing a movie that you're there for. I tend to go to the theaters that do stuff like that for the experience of like being in an audience and seeing cinema as a communal event.
Yeah.
If I'm going to go and see, I don't know, the latest blockbuster or whatever, I'll probably just use my AMC Stubs card and go see it in AMC and whatever. And I probably won't have the food and I won't have the stuff. I'll just go see a Marvel movie and do it and da-da-da-da-da. I tend to go to the ones with the food and everything for like the bigger, either movies I've already seen or like the bigger experiences where I'm going to kind of be more communal. Because that way it's not worrying me so much that there's like a little bit of noise or whatever. We had one experience, which was when John Dies in the End came out. I had been to see it at a press screening with Don Coscarelli and Paul Giamatti, another completely mad experience meeting the two of them, and loved the movie so much that I decided to take some friends when it opened properly at the what used to be the Sunshine is now closed on Houston. And it was for everyone else, it was the premiere screening. It was the first time it was screening in New York. It was a busy night. We'd gone to a late screening, and a guy in front of us turned around and said, so I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to be commenting all the way through the film. And we went, no, you're not. And he was like, no, I do shadow play. I'm like, that's fantastic, but this is like the premiere screening of a brand new movie. I happen to have seen it and no one else here has. So like, no, you won't be doing that. And we had to have like a whole back and forth with this guy who wanted to literally like do bits, like quips and bits and shadow play and Ghostbusters quips and stuff. And I'm like, what? Anyway, that was the only time in a cinema where I've had to tell someone to just, you're not doing that. Be quiet, like shut up and go away.
I am floored.
Yes.
Like, I'm so disgusted. Like I've had terrible experiences and I've had to tell people to be quiet in a varying degree of attitudes. I've never heard anything like that before. That is absolutely insane and terrifying. I
think he thought he was just in like another midnight screening, like a Rocky Horror or Ghostbusters or one of those that they play on midnight that go round and round. And he thought he could just, and we were like, this is a brand new movie. Like this just came out. So yeah, that was the weirdest thing I'd ever had in a cinema. But outside of that, like, you know, yes, in New York, you have to get used to, if you're going to see a Fast and Furious movie, that people will whoop and holler or make comments or whatever.
Fast and Furious movie.
Yes, you do. I never forget when I saw The Expendables for the first time, and Statham does that bit where he comes out of the nose of the plane with the flare gun and lights up the thing and whatever. And I just involuntarily went, yeah, like right in the cinema. And everyone was like, what? And I'm like, it's Statham blowing up a dock. I can't not react. Sure. So I would say the next big step was you writing for Film School Rejects, right? And One Perfect Shot and working with those guys. Was that the next big thing? Was that the next step up you think you took?
I think there's a critical moment between those, and it does tie back to hosting films at the Alamo Drafthouse. This time I was hosting Star Trek V at the Alamo Drafthouse in Ashburn, Virginia. And we had like a massive crowd come out for Star Trek V, which was a film that had at that point not been screened theatrically in a very long time. And it's not the Star Trek movie that gets replay, you know, Wrath of Khan, The Voyage Home, even like the motion picture would play at the AFI every now and again, but no one ever plays Star Trek V. And so I was determined to get that done. And the curator, the programmer of that theater at the time was Gabriel Ruzin. And he's like, we're going to make this happen, Brad, and you're going to host it. So we hosted Star Trek V. And because it was such an epic moment, this Star Trek website called treknews.net, we connected over that, and I wrote an article for them for that. And then when I went out to San Diego, that website got me press passes for the IMAX premiere of Star Trek Beyond. And I wrote their review / experiential article about seeing Star Trek Beyond at Comic-Con, which is without a doubt my all-time favorite theatrical experience of my entire life. And that article got noticed by a guy named Jeff, who at the time was running One Perfect Shot and was trying to turn One Perfect Shot into a birth movie's death / film kind of thing. And he brought me on to write articles for that. And then Film School Rejects ended up buying Jeff's One Perfect Shot site and Twitter feed. And I've been with Film School Rejects ever since then. And then that's when everything really changed.
That's very cool, man. I didn't know about the like Star Trek V connection to you ending up on Film School Rejects. And it proves my theory all the time which is you have to be in this for the stuff you love. This is not about like the fact that you end up doing Film School Rejects, like that's amazing, but it comes from that place of there's this thing I love that a lot of other people might deride or whatever it is, but this is the thing I love and I'm going to put my heart and soul into this thing. And there is a knock-on effect to being able to turn that into something which, you know, clearly you are very, very invested in being a film reviewer and a film experience reporter and so on. And you're fantastic at it. I'll give you kudos and credit to the end of time because both you and Lisa are phenomenal writers when it comes to that. So and you get few of those. You get the blogger writers and you get the people who sadly have become what I call professional critics, and I kind of have issues with a lot of what professional critics say, but when you find someone who's able to take the film fan / blog mentality, but then make it a highly professional, polished piece, that's where I get really excited.
Yeah, I definitely don't consider myself a film critic in any way. Not that I don't want to be a film critic. That's just a different arena, but it's also a very crowded arena. And while I do review things every week on In the Mouth of Dorkness, and I'll review things here and there for Film School Rejects, for the most part, I'm just championing the things that I love. And hey, you got to go check out this book on The Brood because this is an amazing thing that we should all be aware of and celebrating at the moment. Yeah,
definitely. And it just opens doors. Like I found, you know, I get my thing from the occasional, like we were talking before the show, but like the occasional Peter Weller interview where I kind of have to pinch myself that even happened. Like that's a thing that I was able to achieve. Like that to me is fucking mind blowing. Talking to kids in the hall, whatever it is, it's not about. I've never had like great numbers. I make very little off like Patreon and advertising and stuff, but I have made the best friends from doing this for as long as I have, and I've managed to achieve things that just I did not know were even possible for a schlub like me. So that's where I get the thrill from.
I definitely think of it as of having tricked the world into letting me into the rooms with the people that I admire most. It really does feel like a miracle sometimes. To find yourself in certain scenarios. It's very strange.
No, I mean, definitely. It's completely mind-blowing, but it's also awesome. And I kind of have to, it sort of goes across the board whenever I hear a lot of anti-internet or anti-social media rhetoric or anti-Spotify rhetoric or whatever it is, and you hear a lot of people just like mindlessly going at them. And I get that, but and I get where the impulse comes from that. I have to remind myself that all the tools that are available to someone like yourself or me have done nothing but broaden our horizons, broaden the world, give us friends we didn't have before, give us opportunities we didn't have before, give us communities we didn't have before. So it's, you know, I constantly have to remind myself that it's not the game, it's how you play it, I guess.
I agree with all of that. And then as you're seeing, like right now, as we're all self-isolating, it becomes extremely crucial to have this technology just so I can talk to you and talk to my parents and talk to my friends and stay connected, without falling into the other aspect of it, which is like a very negative headspace, which certainly occupies a lot of the internet and from Twitter or whatever.
So let's now go on to, I think it's your latest venture, which is comic book couples counseling, the podcast, which you and your wife Lisa host. Is it weekly? Is it every week? Yeah, no, that's good.
For the most part, it's weekly. It is challenging to get it done because it really is our pet project. And I can say that over the last month, it's been weekly, and the goal is for it to be weekly. But it's also challenging to work around her schedule, my schedule, and what have you. We had a rough start to the year, but again, pandemic-wise, it's made things a little easier to get it out on a weekly basis.
Yeah,
but,
no, I understand that.
The thing I'm most excited about in my life right now, from a creative standpoint, I adore what Lisa and I have been doing. And even though, like, numbers-wise, it might not get as much attention as the film stuff, the interaction that we've had through the listeners of Comic Book Couples Counseling is more intense and loving than anything that we experience on In the Mouth of Dorkness or even Film School Rejects.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that comes back to, like, the more you can kind of narrow a focus, almost the better reaction you're going to get in a weird way. And it must be fantastic that, I mean, obviously Lisa was into a lot of stuff, obviously when you guys were first together, but like the fact that Lisa has been able to, come to the film festivals, do interviews with you, co-host a podcast with you, do the writing as well for After Movie Dine, and bring that in so that you really are like an internet power couple at this point. That must be fantastic, both for you and for the audiences.
It's the best thing in the planet. Lisa's as big a geek as I am, but she's a geek different than I am. What she brings to the conversations, I am often surprised by her take and her point of view on a character, and it makes me fall even more in love with the character. So it's a unique lens, because what we do is we take comic book couples, like we started with Scott Summers and Jean Grey of the X-Men, and for 4 weeks, 4 episodes, we cover their relationship over the course of 4 different story arcs. So with like that first 4 episodes, we covered Chris Claremont and John Byrne's Dark Phoenix saga, and then we jumped over to Bob Layton and Justin Geis's X Factor, the first 6 issues, little Louise Simonson in there too. And then we did I think it's Scott Lobdell's The Adventures of Phoenix and Cyclops, or Cyclops and Phoenix from the 90s. And we closed it out with Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men and his army of artists that he was working with. And what you get to do is you get to see how over 30 years, 40 years, that those couples have changed or not changed, and how their personalities have the consistencies of those personalities and the differences of those personalities over the course of those 4 storylines. And then we take a self-help best-selling relationship book. In that case, we used Gary Chapman's The 5 Love Languages, which is total horseshit in a lot of ways. And then we apply it to that couple, and we discuss it through that lens. And then we take those information, we also apply it to our own relationships and bring out personal stories over the course of our 13 years of marriage. But, like at the same time, while I disagreed with a lot of what Gary Chapman was saying, and from the philosophical place that he was coming from, the religious place he was coming from, I find myself still referring to words of affirmation and the love languages in daily conversation. And I managed to take the good stuff from it, which is what you do when you read comic books, right? You don't remember all the crap over the course of 40 years. You forget the crap, but you remember the gems within those storylines. And so, yeah, it's been a ton of fun. We've covered everybody from X-Men to Sex Criminals, the Matt Fraction, Chip Zdarsky book, We are currently doing Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy. That's been a lot of fun. We're 2 episodes into that. And we've started doing these creator corners, bringing our skill at interviewing into the realm of comic books. And, I know I'm rambling and I'm getting really excited about comic book couples counseling right now, but
do it. We love that. I've got a scrolling thing down the bottom saying that people should listen to it.
You should, because the latest episode is without a doubt my favorite interview I've ever done with anybody. And, talking about pinching yourself, I cannot believe we got this interview secured. And it's with artist-writer Stephen R. Bissett, who, with John Totleben and Alan Moore, launched Saga of the Swamp Thing in 1983, which completely revolutionized the landscape of comic books. And comic books today would not be what they are now without Saga of the Swamp Thing. So it's like a historical, important comic book that I adore, fell in love with again because of our podcast, because a few months ago we covered Swamp Thing and Abigail Arcane. And that has led us into having a conversation with Stephen Bissett, not just about what it was like to shepherd in Saga of the Swamp Thing with Alan Moore and John Totleben and editor Karen Berger, but his opinions on the relationship that they created between Swamp Thing and Abigail, and how Abby really wasn't a 3-dimensional character until they gave her substance in that book. And by the end of that interview, if you listen to it, Stephen Bissett tells us that we asked him questions he's never gotten before, and he's been talking about Swamp Thing for 40 years. So, it's astonishing. And
that's always the joy, and it's always the frustration, I think, when you're on the other end trying to book the interview. Not that you want to necessarily blow your ego out of the water, but you want to be able to say, no, this is not going to be the 10-minute tell me what it was like working on your latest film interview. This is going to be a conversation between 2 people with 2 different skill sets, with 2 different interests, that are going to be discussing, yes, work you did in the case of this, a comic book or a script, in the case of an actor or a director, the film they made. But we're going to be having an actual conversation about it rather than a puff piece. I assume now, having done the 10-minute phonos or having done the little interviews with people, I assume I know how a film generally is made and how it feels to generally be on set, and the fact that no one's going to tell me that their co-star was a fucking asshole. You know what I mean? Everyone's going to be very nice about it. So I couldn't care less to ask those questions. And similarly, when you are passionate about a subject, invariably you're going to ask questions that the person has never been asked before. And the best interviews for me are the ones where the people realize it's going to be a conversation, mm-hmm. and put away their pat answers that they've had for 30 years. I think the most frustrating interviews are the ones where you're asking questions they haven't been asked before, and they manage to wind it back to whatever that fucking soundbite is they've been saying for 10 years. It just drives me nuts. Well, Bruce Campbell. Sorry.
Here's the thing. I know your pain, John, because most of my interviews that I do for FSR are 15-minute, God forbid it, 10-minute interviews where you have a very limited amount of time, and to penetrate beyond what everyone else is asking. And because when we do those 10 and 15-minute interviews, those are happening on a day when they are doing 20 of them. And so they are hearing the same questions over and over again. Right. So when you, even in the context of those 10 and 15-minute interviews, when you do ask them something they have not been asked before that day, they can't answer it because they're not in that mode. And so it does require, to get a good interview, it requires a different point of view from that person being interviewed, if that makes sense. And it requires time. And so with Stephen Bissett, he gave us 3 hours that day. And the first hour, we talked to him about his new book on David Cronenberg's The Brood. That's on the In the Mouth of Dorkness channel. And then the second part of that 3 hours is on comic book couples counseling. And that is just unheard of. You just do not get that time really at all. Even in those 3 hours, you'll ask him questions that you've researched and well, he hasn't quite been asked this question in this way. You're right. He goes and he does pull out information that he said in other interviews that he's written in, afterwards and essays, and because he's a great writer and he's written about his own work. So he does have concepts that he likes to explore and likes to stack on top of. But 20 minutes into the interview, suddenly you've loosened your subject up and you're getting new content. And that's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah, no, definitely. It was, and I always like, if something goes a certain way and I've had a certain amount of time with someone, normally if it goes over 20 minutes, if it goes over 20 minutes, I will ask the question at the very end that that's the only question I really care about the answer to. But I know it's a question that could piss them off. It's a question that could maybe so if it pisses them off and they go away pissed off, that's fine. If I never speak to them again, I mean, it's not fine. I don't want to ever piss anyone off. But if you ask that, I asked Peter Weller at the very end about James Woods, and I asked him about it because we had been doing the Woods and Weller shows on the After Movie Diner podcast. They've only ever been in one HBO TV thing together, and even not in the same segment. It was an anthology thing and they were in different segments. They've never been on screen together. They've never mentioned each other in any interviews, except when Weller was on Kevin Pollak's show. And he very briefly said, you would miss it if you weren't looking for it, something along the lines of, man, you talk as fast as Woodsy, right? Mm-hmm. And then they went on and da-da-da-da-da. So I had to, in my interview, ask him the question, so before you go, do you know James Woods? Because if you do, I've done 10 shows about your movies and da-da-da-da-da. And then he tells this amazing story about James Woods. Now, fuck James Wood. James Wood's politics and James Wood as a human being is a despicable human being. I'm not holding him up as anything particularly, but to have pulled two actors that we think are weird, strange, and give interesting performances, who both have last names that begin with W, and do a whole series of podcasts about, to find out through a circuitous route that they knew each other and there's this mad story, that was enough for me. That was the little bow on the thing. But you can only ask those questions right at the end of it. If I'd started the interview with, so anyway, James Woods, Peter Weller would be fuck this guy. So I don't know if you have any of those questions that were, and I have one question, talk about Bruce Campbell. I have one question I've never been able to, and I've interviewed Bruce and I've done Q&As at Bruce's stuff. I've never been able to find a concise way to ask this question to get the response I would want from it. Because there's too many, I'm such a weird, insane, fan of his, or I was at a certain point, that there were too many touch points I would have to explain in the question in order to hopefully get an answer to it. But so that one leaves, that's my Moby Dick hanging out there.
All right. Well, don't tell it, because you gotta save that thing.
Yeah, no, I have that one question, but I don't know. Do you have any questions like that you either have asked and either regretted asking, loved that you asked, or have not summoned up the courage to ask?
I mean, I've definitely had, I'm thinking of two interviews right now where it was on any given day, this would be a pinch me phone interview, right? But it was one of those 15-minute, 20-minute interviews. The first one being with Ron Perlman. And it was for that movie Asher that he did a couple of years ago. And actually, both of these interviews are for the same film.
Okay.
So I got Ron Perlman on the phone, and I really dug that movie. I thought it was a pretty cool crime film, low budget, produced by Perlman. Clearly, he had a lot of passion for the project. And at the end of the film, there's a pretty great shootout that begins with Ron Perlman under the floor in the basement, and he shoots through the floor, and it's a pretty badass moment. And I was over the moon over this moment, and I was this is where I'll start the conversation. I'll start the conversation with him slaughtering a bunch of dudes and how much I loved this action scene. And it was clear the moment I started the conversation praising that sequence that he thought I was an idiot and that I was just some bro who loves violence, when he made this very meditative piece about aging and the stain of violence on a person. And that interview went terribly.
Oh,
and so
no.
20 minutes, he gave me yes, no answers to questions that did not pose yes, no responses. And it was brutal. And it was like the longest 20 minutes of my life. And when it got done, it just ruined my week. Because I admire Ron Perlman so much, and because it was going so terribly, I, of course, had my Hellboy questions in my back pocket that I wanted to ask, because it was also around the time that the David Harbour version was coming around. And I'm a massive Mike Mignola Hellboy fan, and I just wanted to get my Hellboy moment. And I just never got to it, and it was brutal. And I just, even talking about it, I feel like real hangdog about it.
I've had that. I've definitely had that where I've tried to bring up action stuff without sounding like I'm just some action bro. It's an awkward thing. It's an awkward moment.
It was brutal. And then so the next interview that was paired with that was Richard Dreyfuss, who has a very small role in the film. And, Jaws is without a doubt my all-time favorite movie. I've seen Jaws more than any other movie, except maybe Star Wars, if you count all the times I watched it as a child. Jaws is a masterpiece. And here I am. I'm going to talk to Richard Dreyfuss. Actually, it was not for Asher, even though he was in Asher. It was for this movie called Astronaut, another A film, which was fine. I don't need to talk about Astronaut. But I get him on the line, and I'm very excited, and I've got my questions. And I can't remember what the first question was, but he deflected it, and he goes, actually, what I want to talk about is the Greek gods and how the Greek gods are a perfect metaphor for blah, blah, blah. And I can't even remember his response. You should go read the interview on Film School Rejects. I printed out the entire transcript of it, because he just kept going back to the Greek gods. And then 4 minutes in, I was like, all right, I'm going to lean in. Forget all my previous questions. Forget where I want this conversation to go. He wants to talk Greek gods. Let's talk Greek gods. And then we were like, okay, so let's talk about Mars, Richard Dreyfuss. And it was the most surreal and bizarre and antagonistic, because clearly he did this because he just didn't want to do interviews anymore. And he was just like, I'm going to take this kid for a ride. And he did. And I loved it in a way that I did not appreciate the Ron Perlman interview. But Richard Dreyfuss wanted to have fun. I had fun with him. And it's one of the strangest and most bizarre interviews I've ever published.
Nice. Very nice. Well, as we're wrapping up now, Gary Hill has been saying, Gary Hill's a big fan of Swamp Thing, by the way. He loved your conversation about Swamp Thing. He said that Perlman, he's seen him at a few shows, few conventions, bit of a douchebag vibe, apparently, which is sad to hear, but a bit of a negative vibe around Perlman, which is a shame, because Kim's a huge Hellboy fan as well. So, and a huge Perlman fan in general. So, but his social media seems weird as well. He does this weird, Hispanic voice, and I'm not quite sure why. It's sort of odd. Anyway.
The week I interviewed him, right before I interviewed him, I listened to the Movies That Made Me podcast that Joe Dante and Josh Olson do.
Yeah.
And it was a great conversation. So when I got done with listening to that podcast, I was like, oh, this guy's going to be a total breeze to talk to. He's going to be so easy and fun, and he's going to be very informative. And I really feel like, because I came in at with my weird action thing, he just shut down instantly. And
yeah.
I'd like to get in the room with him one more time.
No, definitely. No, I'm sure it's purely either mood based or day based on whatever the situation is. But what was I going to say about? Oh yeah. The Movies That Made Me podcast, I love that podcast, but I just wish Joe Dante hosted it. He's the most fascinating person on any of those shows. He's the one.
I understand what you're saying, and Josh Olson can be awkward at times, although I am a Josh Olson fan, and I like the dynamic that they have on that show. And
I agree with that.
When I've had the pleasure of seeing Josh Olson on panels at San Diego Comic-Con a few times, and he does have like some really crazy stories. But Joe Dante is a fountain of information and narrative, and I would listen to that guy all day long. And he's the guy I'd like to interview more than anybody else. Like if I was putting a list of Holy Grail interviews, he's in the top 5 for me.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I need to have a much longer conversation with him.
Right. Yeah.
I remember ages ago on a Q&A he was doing on Twitter, I put something up about doing an interview with him, and he was like, have your people talk to my people. And I was like, tell me who your people are. And I never got like a response.
Well, that's why you need IMDb Pro. That's what I should probably get IMDb Pro.
Well, I'll get his information and send them to you. And then lastly, Gary was saying that he has a picture of Richard Dreyfuss wearing his sweaty bowler hat and is very proud of it. Apparently, Gary went to a convention wearing a bowler hat and decided to put the hat on Dreyfuss when they had the picture taken, and apparently it all worked out. So Brad, before we get you saying like where you come from and where people can find you online, where you come from, I don't know why I said that. I'm riffing this.
Long Beach, California.
Where people can find you online, I mean. Do you happen to have any music that you particularly like indie music or friends who do bands or anything that you could say right now that I could like find and play a song from? Or should I just do my pitch for people to send me indie bands and stuff so that I have music to play on the show?
I mean, my friend, Physics, he's a rapper. I love his music. I'll have to like send you like a link to his site. You can find him on Facebook and what have you. But he's one of those guys where when you hear his music, you're like, I know that guy, the guy who's making this music. I know him. This is crazy. So that would be my plug.
Great. I will send me his details and I'll reach out to him for a future show to play him on the show. But yes, if anyone is watching right now who either knows someone who's in a band, knows someone who has music, knows someone, knows a band or knows people, send them to me because I would love to highlight indie bands and indie music on the show as much as possible. That's what we used to do on the old show. So I'm trying to pull it in where I can here. I don't have anything set up for today, but it's been fantastic talking to you, Brad, and going through your life as a film fanatic and a comic book fan. Let everyone know where they can find you online. I
really appreciate it. It's always weird when someone's like, let's talk about you, because I love talking and I do love talking about me. So thank you for giving me the platform to do so. But you can find me on all social medias at MouthDork. It's spelled like it sounds. You can find the In the Mouth of Dorkness podcast at ITMODcast, ItModcast. You can find the Comic Book Couples Counseling podcast at CBCC podcast. That's all on Twitter. That's on Instagram, all those good places, Facebook. And then you can find me every day on Film School Rejects and One Perfect Shot at One Perfect Shot on Twitter.
Well, it's awesome, Brad. It's always wonderful to talk to you and the different things we pull up and the different tangents we go down. It's always fun. We'll have you back on the After Movie Diner when I decide to start doing that show again. I don't know what.
Shatner. Not enough Shatner today.
No, we didn't talk Shatner at all today.
No, we didn't. Well, we got Star Trek 5 in there, and we got some fan dance. So.
Which is odd because I've been rewatching with my friends Jeff and Dave. I've been rewatching the original Star Trek movies. So we did Wrath of Khan last week, and we did Voyage Home last night. I watched 3 in between because I didn't want to miss out, and we are going back and doing the motion picture at a later date. But
and 5, you got to do 5.
And 5, we will do 5. We will do 5 because I've longed to watch Shatner compete with God again.
Yes.
What have you got there, sir? What are you going to show us there?
Oh, that's just my Cybok Star Trek V action figure that sits above my desk at all times.
Look at that right there. That's fantastic. And is that a custom one, or is that one that actually exists in the world?
No, this is from Galoob. And this was considered an action figure in the 80s. And it comes with a little stand and has zero articulation.
Yeah, zero articulation. Action figures used to be in action, essentially. But that's all good. Andy Lunn is also saying that we need some Spader. So I will be doing, Andy, do not worry, I will be doing Sleazy Spader Springtime on the After Movie Diner. It's probably the next series of podcasts I do over there. I pivoted over to this because I'm interested in the whole live streaming thing, just for this kind of quarantine period. And it also gives me a chance to have different conversations. So I've kind of pivoted over to this for a bit. If people don't like it, tough. I don't care. But they do. People are watching it. People are commenting. So I want to thank everyone in the chat room and everyone on Facebook who has been watching who may not have said anything. But Brad will do this again. Thanks so much for being on the show. All the best, sir, and all the best with your fantastic upward trajectory of your wonderful writing career. Congratulations.
Much appreciated, John. Thank you so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.
All right. And we end the broadcast.